Yeah, it's funny too because I was having this conversation with PD yesterday, who for those of you that don't know, Ty and I go to the same church, and PD is our lead pastor. But I was talking to PD yesterday about some stuff, maybe the day before, and it was just kind of like after a while, like in the personal development space, if you've been in it long enough, you kind of start to realize that it's everybody's saying the same stuff. Everybody's pushing the same, not agenda, but the same sort of idea. And so, like, if you're in that personal development space, you only have a client for so long before they recognize they really just need to take action. It's really up to them to figure it out because we're all dealing with the same stuff. And it's somebody might present a little differently. You might like Tony Robbins more than you like Brendan Burchard, or you might like this pastor more than you like that pastor, just because you vibe with them better. But at the end of the day, I
Mhm.
feel like most everybody is saying the same. And like kind of like what you said earlier, like most of the people I talk to and most of the ideas or the things that I present, they're not original ideas. They're not original content. It's my take or their take on what somebody else has already said. We've been humans for, you know, however long you want to think we've been humans for. There's not a whole lot of original ideas out there anymore. Like we're just pushing
Yeah.
the same stuff, but it's good to like connect with people who see it similarly to you versus maybe somebody who's taken a way more, direct or indirect approach or whatever. So,
I had that kind of happen with Jordan Peterson. I started listening to him in
mm,
2018, and he was kind of the first, like, I guess, self help, maybe celebrity. I feel like that does him injustice, but to vaguely
yeah,
explain. And you know, I was coming from a perspective of like kind of just finding my faith again for the first time in maybe like a decade plus.
mm,
And I thought it was really funny because like he, doesn't back in 2018, let's say, he didn't necessarily come from a biblical perspective, but I was kind of developing a biblical perspective of, my sort of self-help, so to say. And I saw it growing in him. I resonated with the things he was saying, and I was like, man, this dude's spitting truth. And then within like 2 years, by 2020, that man started getting real biblical. And I was like, there it is. It's
yeah,
kind of like you're saying, there's a certain truth that can be sifted down through the generations, and it might take different forms and it might look differently. But I think something I really resonate is, truth recognizes truth. And
hmm
as they might say in the streets, like real recognizes real. That's something I definitely see in a lot of people once I start talking to them. You and I think we've probably talked maybe FaceTime 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe. And, one of the most recent conversations we had was talking about our sobriety and stuff. And I was like, whoa, dude, I really relate to you on that, and
yeah.
I didn't even I didn't even know you were that much older than me. You got that youthful charm, dude. So I
I
was like,
appreciate it.
wow,
Yeah, I look
yeah,
young. I'm a lot older than most of my most of my circle.
totally. I get that though too. I'm the same way. Like I don't really judge by age. I judge by like quality of character, So I can get along with a 19-year-old. I could get along with a 60-year-old. It's a matter of like not just shared values, but I think like perspective, if someone's willing to like
Yeah,
investigate the truth with me and kind of discuss that, and that gives me the position to kind of be like, oh hey, there's a lot more we can unpack there. Let's be friends. Let's talk about some stuff.
yeah,
How'd your sobriety go? How's what do you think of quantum physics? Is usually where I
yeah.
end.
I love it. Yeah, it's funny you bring up Jordan Peterson. There's two things I want to kind of dive into there. Because I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peterson, and I think he gets a bad rap because a lot of people. It's fascinating to me how, and this goes along with like Christianity and some of the other things too, right? Like I was away from the church for a long time, primarily because there's a lot of people who use the church in a weaponized kind of way, right? Like they use it to shame, they use it to guilt, they use it to divide, and that just never resonated with me in like what Jesus taught, right? Like it was all like Jesus is love. Like how are we using this to divide people into disenfranchise and all of that? and I think Jordan Peterson, not that he's the second coming of Jesus by any stretch, like not to compare him with Jesus, but and the you know what Jordan Peterson says is often very accurate. His following in a large way is using that to hurt, to disenfranchise, to separate, right? Like he's got this kind of far right
Mm.
following that
Oh yeah.
uses snippets of what he says to justify their poor behavior. And I find that like the church uses snippets of what Jesus said to justify their own bigotry on stuff. And so it's funny to
Mhm.
me. I always resonate with people who get Jordan Peterson or people who are like him because there's truth there, right? And it's like you said, like truth recognizes truth. So my question is, do you think that the people who maybe push back on the Jordan Petersons of the world, the Joe Rogans of the world, the people who are kind of just unpacking these things, and do you think they push back against that because the truth sometimes hurts? The truth is sometimes a little like, man, I got to really think about this. And it means that I might have to change. And we resist that, right? Like we fight, flight, or freeze. So
Mhm.
it's like, do I go into fight mode? Right. Like, and I'm seriously just thinking this for the first time as you mentioned that, like, truth recognizes truth. I was like, damn, is that why the divide is getting bigger because of our fight or flight response?
I would say so. I think that's a really astute observation because I would say the thing that seems to be going on right now a lot in the world is like people really want to feel vindicated, or they want their feelings and emotions to be, recognized and appreciated. And, unfortunately, the truth can sometimes be a little callous to how you feel. It's like I,
Yeah.
for instance, I have been studying quantum physics since 2018. And while I'm not like totally sold on all the theories, there are some things like the multiverse, for instance, that is kind of uncomfortable to unravel and kind of
Yeah.
uncomfortable to think. And it gets, I think there's this sadness that people can kind of get from it where it's like, well, if there's infinite variations of me and infinite possibilities unraveling every moment, then where do I sit in that? Where am I important in that? How am I, at all some sort of relevant figure in that? And I think that's the thing that kind of hurts people about some of these things is like it's kind of ripping off a band-aid, like
Hmm.
there's some truths for me, for instance, like I spent a lot of time studying different religions in my life, and
Same.
studied. Yeah, we talked about that. That's something I want to dig into a lot more too. But I
Yeah.
studied like Viking mythology, with the Norse gods. I studied Buddhism, Hinduism, all that stuff. And there's some, pretty words in there. There's some things that are very like influential when you hear them and they're empowering. But also sometimes it's like finding out that those things aren't necessarily true, that those are just kind of the words or the machinations of man trying to encourage other men. I think that's where it's like sometimes people just want to feel good and they just want to be
Hmm.
told that they're okay and they're right. And when that truth kind of conflicts with that in people, it's abrasive and it can hurt and it can cause blisters, just like any other
Yeah.
abrasion. And I think that's what really repels people from the truth in the modern days, that we've kind of cultivated a society where we care a little bit more about people's feelings and stuff than we do about the truth. And that's kind of overriding the truth, which, I don't want to sit here and espouse like people's feelings don't matter. I don't want that to be, misconstrued. But I do think
Yeah.
open-mindedness can be a valuable asset when you're willing to shed the falsehoods that you've believed in the past and you're willing to accept the truth. And I personally have found that that's kind of where my faith came from, is like shedding a lot of the old ideas, the old values that didn't necessarily do me good. They might have felt good, but they weren't
Yeah.
making me a better person. They weren't positively influencing my community and the people around me. And I found that as I've embraced let's say the truth more, um, I've found that like it's really resonating in my life. It's, been such a positive influence, and I've been able to meet a higher quality of people, because I think when, like I said, when truth recognizes truth, that's when I think real bonds can form, and that
Yeah.
what would be the opposite of that is like having a friendship or, relationship built on a foundation of lies, that's not sustainable.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because I like, the hardest part for me in coming back to my relationship with God, and sort of surrendering, was that I had to surrender, that I had to face some truths that didn't make me feel good, right? So
Hmm.
I and I think a lot of people are in this space, and even like my oldest daughter, who for a long, like, she's not a Jesus follower. She's sort of, I would say, my observation, not her words, would be that she's sort of floating and trying to figure some things out. And for a long time, our family was one of those families that would say, well, we're spiritual but not religious. And it wasn't God, it was the universe, and it was like, energetic fields. It's like, I want to dive into this quantum physics thing, because
Oh yeah.
I'm curious, what your studies have taken you. But for my oldest kid, like, she's in this whole, like, spiritual space, and for a long time it's cool, it's crystals, and it's moon cycles, and it's things like that, and those feel good, and they're fun, and they're interesting, and a lot of it
Hmm.
is to, like, feed your desire to search for joy and things like that. But her and I had this conversation a couple weeks ago about how none of those thought leaders, none of the people that are kind of driving that movement, are saying anything substantial. It's all real vague. It's all real fluid. And I think that's because there's no foundation to it. And it's not to say that there isn't, like, theories and ideas and stories and great stuff, but, like, for me, having been an affirmed or an acclaimed Buddhist for a period of time. I mean, I leaned into Buddhism to get sober, because
Yeah.
coming from a Catholic upbringing, I wasn't going back to the church to get sober. I was just going to be shamed into whatever, right? So that wasn't for me at that time. I didn't think it was an option. But um, the thing that so I've been in those spaces, and I've studied some of those religions, and I don't really, it's funny that Buddhism gets lumped into religions of the world, because it's really not a religion, it's more of a philosophy.
Totally.
But it just gets lumped into that because people practice it, and they're religious about their philosophy. But they're um like,
Totally.
nobody in Buddhism is praying to Buddha, right? It's a weird sort of thing. But for me, what set it apart, and where I kind of came back to the whole church and the faith thing, was what set Christianity apart, in spite of all its faults, was the truth in, you know, Jesus existed. We know this. He died. We know this. Like, not just, doesn't require faith. It's just in fact. It's a known truth. And he rose from the dead. And so for me, like, when I had to get into that very academically, it was like, okay, I can't turn my back on this because I know it to be true. And so then, if that's true, most of whatever else he said and he did and he suggested is going to be more likely true. And that required me to surrender this idea that from a spiritual standpoint, I could just create my own reality. And it forced me
Hmm.
into, like, no, there is this other force that's not just there, it's actually for me, and I have to submit to it. And that was hard. Like, my ego was fighting that hard. And one of the things I used to say before I sort of returned to the church is, like, only sheep need a shepherd, right? And there's this whole, like,
Oh,
American
yeah.
idea that, like, I'm not a sheep, and it's like, no, maybe not, but you should be. There are some things that you should,
Right.
like, good leaders know how to follow, right? And so that was the hardest thing for me, and that was, like, going through all of those other sort of faiths and the spiritual stuff, was recognizing how I needed to submit in order to belong, if that makes sense. Like, maybe that's not the right way to say it, but yeah,
Uh,
it's
I
it's definitely been
resonate
a
with that.
journey.
Yeah, dude, I so relate this. But so for me, man, you pump me up just talking to you. I
Thanks.
I got into Buddhism at 17, and it kind of
Okay.
was, I don't want to put it on Buddhism that I left the church, but let's say that like I found a different source of like spiritual knowledge and I
Hmm.
really deep dived into that. And so for my most of my 20s, I considered myself like a Christian Buddhist. And as I kind of, deep dived into Buddhism, I started seeing, that Buddhism is kind of, to really water it down, it's a public version of Hinduism. It's more for the masses. It's easily palpable compared to Hinduism, and it's got a lot of similar aspects.
Hmm.
The thing that really got me was learning about like the bodhisattvas in Buddhism, and there's one bodhisattva that I know of that has like 1,000 hands, right? And there's this imagery from, it looks like Doctor Strange or something from the Marvel movies. They kind of copied it, but like there's all these different hands coming out of the side of this Buddha, and each hand is doing something different. It has
Hmm.
different tools, different things. Um, the idea behind that Buddha, a bodhisattva is just a different Buddha. So this bodhisattva is said to have 1,000 hands to help 1,000 people. And the reason I bring that up is because as I learn more about the multiverse and stuff, you mentioned kind of there's this aspect of like life where you can kind of create your own reality. And I found through my spiritual endeavors that that's a very true aspect, that I kind of am that bodhisattva that like any minute I could have 1,000 hands to help 1,000 different people. Even sitting here in my bedroom, there's still that potential that's existing to reach out into the world and do 1,000 different good deeds for 1,000 different people. And so in trying to pursue that in my life and trying to have like a really positive influence, that also led to like the multiverse stuff where it's like, the physicists would say that in any minute there's a million infinite different branches of reality that are all kind of branching out, and you're kind of walking these potentials in different parallel universes. And this reality that we're experiencing is just one, let's say, like blossom of that potential, right? This is one pathway that's being unfolded in front of us. And so that was where I realized, like, okay, if I can do 1,000 different good deeds right now in this moment, theoretically, and there's 1,000 different lives I could live, then the one that I'm living, I have to really choose to make it worthwhile. I have to choose which of those good deeds I can manifest right here in this world, in, what I have in front of me. And that's where it all kind of connects for me. The spirituality that I've developed, it it kind of branches for me the logical path with like the science and what it's saying nowadays. And so the way I've taken like solace and comfort in that is to know that like I'm living out one really beautiful expression of what I could be doing. And I always try to like strive for that. So if I can do 1,000 different things, then, how does that matter? Well, I make it matter. I make it matter by living out the best possible reality that I can right now. And the humbling thing about that is like I heard this song a decade and a half ago said something like, plans are only prayers to Father Time. And, so the way I see it is like my plans are only going to get me so far. There's this kind of, let's just be straightforward with how I feel. There's the Lord out there who's kind of dictating, what happens. And I found that for myself, submission to Christ felt like freedom. It felt like no longer is it just on me to attempt to try to understand how to walk 1,000 different pathways and find the most, let's say wholesome one or the best one, the one that's going to provide the most good to the world. I now put that guidance and that stewardship in the Lord and Christ, and the morality that's imbued in our religion, let's say through Christianity, is what guides and dictates my actions. And so I found that in this overwhelming multiverse that we live in, I take faith in knowing that the Lord's guiding my hand, that the morality
Mm.
that's been passed down to us through Christ is what drives my actions and dictates my path that I choose. And so I find that for me personally, one of the things I've kind of concluded is that when you become a follower of Christ, that kind of narrows down those 1,000 paths. It narrows it down so that you're now walking the path of Christ, which I don't think is ever going to be a bad path to walk. That I would argue is like the greatest path one could walk. And so I find that that all kind of closes. The focus becomes tighter in the lens as I've established my faith and practiced, following what would Jesus do. I found that it's not overwhelming, that I don't feel like I'm some, needle in a haystack or, something like that. I find that I'm actually more empowered now to do good and to feel great about my actions, because it's not on me to make those decisions. It's my faith, and I would say the grace that I've been blessed with that guides it.
Hmm. Wow, that's heavy.
Yeah, that was a
It's
lot to
interesting.
unpack.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there because, like, I'm curious where you would think the morality of those who aren't Jesus followers comes from. I'm curious about, a lot of those things and how we experience them. Because for me, yeah, like I would just say, like, so take the morality piece, right? Like, is that a choice that you make? Because in the times that you weren't a Jesus follower, right, in that season of your life where you didn't feel like that was your guiding force, you still had morality, you still made moral choices. So
Hmm.
where would you suggest that for those people who maybe don't follow Jesus, you know, where does that morality come from? Because that's one of the big arguments that atheists would make, is that I don't have to believe in God to be a good person. Um,
Totally.
so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so I would say for me, it was kind of a special case because I was baptized when I was 10 and I grew up a Christian, and then I left the church. So I kind of had that a little bit ingrained in me. But I'd say for someone who doesn't, I think the best thing I could maybe recommend is that, the people that inspire you, the people that you see and you're like, that dude's awesome and he's cool and I really like what he's doing and saying. I'd say those are the people to kind of lean on a little bit, because like Jordan Peterson, that's what I did, in a period of my life where I lacked faith enough to kind of lean on Christ for what to do. I looked to like men who I don't know if admired's the right word, but men who I looked up to, men who I thought were worth following. I kind of took to borrowing from them. And so a lot of my philosophy is really like a quilt, like a patchwork quilt,
Mhm.
So like with a Buddhism, for instance, like I walk around and there's a lot of Buddha that kind of dictates my actions and, the morality. But more so recently it's Christ, and I think that same thing can be done with man. The only thing is like the heart of man's a fickle thing, right? So like
Mhm.
you might be following someone who, seems to be an extraordinary person, but then what happens when they flip the script on you? Man is a faulty creature,
Yeah.
and I've made mistakes throughout my life. So I would never want to hear someone be like, Ty's the greatest example, follow him, because it's like, oh man, let's pump the brakes there. Like if you follow, maybe
Right.
chapter
Right.
10, 12, and 2 might be good ones to read back on. But there's some chunks in my life where it's like, I would not recommend people take my lead, and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And that's where I think what you said about a good leader is also, kind of his own disciple. He's also willing to take orders and willing to hear out people. And I think that's kind of a signifier of someone who's maybe worth following, is like someone who has that humility. And I saw that a lot in Jordan Peterson. While he was sometimes brash with the things he said, I think that goes back to what we started off with. The truth can sometimes be abrasive and hurt,
Yeah.
but also I saw enough of the truth in him that I was like, okay, while I lack that foundation of truth in my own life, I'm going to take notes on what he's saying and I'm going to, kind of integrate that into my life as best I can. And so, like, one of the things that Jordan Peterson said that really changed my life was, he was like, if you don't know what to do with your life, there's 3 questions I want you to ask yourself. 1, what do you want to see most in the world? 2, how can you get there? What do you have to do in the next 5 minutes to make that happen? And then the next 5 minutes, and then the next 5 minutes. And then
Yeah.
3 is, how will it help people, or will it help people? And that's kind of where I got to quantum physics for me, was like, what do I want to see most in the world? We're about to turn it up really, really, really hard here. I want to see space colonies. I want to see this world eased of its resource burden. I want to see people be able to live like full lives and not have like, these children who could be the next Einstein, starving in a ditch in some country because the instability of their nation doesn't provide an adequate ground for them to develop and grow. I
Mm,
want to see this world kind of like use these technologies and these science concepts that we've developed to like better humans' lives. And we see that a little bit here every day. The internet, it's kind of like one of those double-sided swords. Does it make people's lives better? Yes. Does it make it worse? Yes. How do we
mhm.
change that though? And I think that continuing to grow with technology, it's like we have that option to kind of like lead to our own destruction or lead to our own, let's say like utopic almost future. And
Yeah.
how do I get there? I started thinking like, well, space colonies aren't that far off. I've grown up with the science fiction all my life. So I started digging into that and I was like, I'm going to get a physics degree. I'm going to work on, putting myself in that boat and guiding the ship a little, because I think I have concepts and values that are worth bringing into the scientific community, and I really want to like grow with it. I want to help develop some of these things that are going to make the world better for everyone. And so, that was kind of it. Like, that's the second question: get a physics degree. And will it help people? Well, I think the first two questions answer the third question in this instance for me. It's like, there's vast potential to help people through scientific innovations. It's really just a matter of like who's steering the ship. And so, talking about like the atheist who doesn't, know who to follow because he doesn't follow Christ. I personally, I look at these guys like Bezos and Musk, who are some of the biggest titans of industry when it
Mm,
comes to space colonization. And I don't want either of them to be successful in what they do. I want what they're trying to do to have good people integrated into it so that those good people can, kind of help aim the trajectory of where we're going in a place that's going to benefit everyone. Sort of like Elon Musk. I think Mars is kind of a bad decision. Honestly, it's if we move to Mars, like what my great grandchildren are going to be the ones who get to enjoy a Martian sunset out in the air, open air. So it's going to be a rough and tumble life. Whereas if we make these space colonies that I'm working on, which for your viewers here, this is the kind of space colony I want to design. This is called an
mm.
O'Neill cylinder. It's going to be 6 miles in diameter at the circle. It's going to be 22 miles in length and could, at their
Wow.
largest, house upwards of 10 million people.
Good.
So when I talk about why I don't want to go to Mars, this is why I don't want to go to Mars. There's a better potential with this space colony that was designed in 1976 by a man named Gerard K. O'Neill. And then when it comes to Bezos, it's a pretty simple one for me to say. Like, again, it kind of goes back to like, should we follow man or should we have some sort of higher um, thing that provides us with our morality? And I don't think Bezos has that morality that's going to guide
Yeah.
him to a better future. So when I talk about Bezos, I'm like, well, the only way it might sound a little arrogant, but I think the only way he's going to succeed without creating some totalitarian space colony is to have good people involved in it who have morality, who are Christ followers, who want the truly best outcome for mankind and not just the top dollar.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy because I am like I have a very little interest in space.
Yeah.
Like I look at what we have here, and not that like, and I love science fiction and I love that stuff, but like when it comes to like real world space exploration and that sort of thing, I sort of land in this really kind of maybe like we've done so much damage here on this planet. Why do I want to support damaging other planets in our endeavors? So I like your idea that like Mars isn't the answer, like this space colony, and that's not maybe planted on a planet, right? Like it's something
Mhm.
else. I like that idea better than going and like, because I mean it's human nature, I think, for us to basically, I'm gonna take a hard left turn here, but like one of the reasons why I fully believe the Earth is round and not flat is if it was flat, because of human nature, we would have found the edge and we would have put a resort and an amusement park on it, because that's what we do. We we we
Yeah.
exploit all the things that can make us money, right? Those that are just human nature, right?
Hmm.
And using, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos as examples of that is perfect, because that's exactly it, right? Like how do I make the most money to exploit the thing so that I can do whatever I want with it. But like I sort of land in this place of like, how about before we put billions of dollars into other worlds, other areas outside this planet, we
Hmm.
work on fixing this one, or just stop. We don't even have to fix it. It's like Jordan Peterson says, don't lie, or at least, or he says, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. And
Right.
I saw him unpack that a little bit. And what he said was, like, he's like, realistically, the reason he added or at least don't lie is because we can't in most instances truly know the truth, because we all have our biases, we all have our points of view, and we can't really know all the aspects to know the truth. So at the very least, don't lie. And I
Hmm.
really love the way he put that. um but so for me, it's like I just feel like we have so much work to do here. So like we don't even need to fix it. Let's just stop damaging it. If we just stop damaging it, it will repair itself, right? The ecosystems of the planet are really, really intricate in that way. And I don't have to fix
Hmm.
it. I just have to stop messing with it, and it will fix itself,
Totally.
right? You look at certain parts of the world, take Aztec ruins, for example, where the humans are gone and somehow nature has overrun that. And I've seen
Yeah.
some places where, like, war torn cities within 12 years are lush and green again, and the buildings are almost overtaken because nature's going to do what nature's going to do. It doesn't need us to intervene. Um,
Hmm.
so that's really fascinating. Yeah, and I kind of land in this place of like, does does it matter really? And then I sort of have this Star Wars-esque viewpoint to shift gears a little bit of like, there has to be balance in the
Yeah.
force. So we're never going to eradicate poverty. We're never going to eradicate, those things in as long as there's humans around, because you're always going to have these archetypes that are going to force balance, right? You're always going to have your Jedis and your Darth Vaders, right? Like they're always going to be there's always going to be.
Hmm.
And so for me, like that's when one of the like flaws in this idea of getting to a utopian type scenario is
Hmm.
like, if you and then and at the same time we're talking about like, oh, we need to have balance, you have work-life balance, this balance, this.
Right.
Well, balance means you're gonna have, you know people who are it means you're gonna have a wage gap. You're gonna have people who are doing really, really well, and you're gonna have people who aren't, because then if there's no tension, what are we working towards? Then we're just, it's like Hunger Games. Like
Pretty much.
you're still gonna have people in District 12 who are broke. and and it's just how it's gonna be. And if we eliminate all that, then who's gonna come clean the house of the really wealthy? Nobody. Like, we have to have these constructs. We just don't like it, right? Because it doesn't feel good, because you're going to have haves and have nots. And I know I'll get flack for that, and people who want to eliminate all that. And it's like, kind of circle back like with Jordan Peterson, it's opportunity of outcome versus opportunity of what is it, equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome, right?
Ooh, yeah.
Like, I can't define your outcome for you. So that's not up to me, but somebody's going to have to, you know, there are people who aren't going to be successful in that way, right? They're not going to have that. And so I just wonder if like the space exploration and some of the things, and my father-in-law would totally disagree. He loves it. He loves watching all of it. Like, he can't wait for autonomous cars. And I'm like, I will be Will Smith and iRobot, and I will be driving a Ford Bronco from 1965 or whatever one, you
Right.
know, I will be driving a stick shift that I have to manually shift into gear while everyone else is driving their autonomous cars, because I like analog in a lot of ways, and I love tech. I love all my tech stuff, but I like watering my grass versus
Right.
the automated sprinklers, or you know what I'm saying?
Hmm. I think that's where it kind of gets to be a really dicey situation, because we can use technology for a betterment, I think, or we can use it to become lazier. And I fear that, like, in
Yeah.
recent years, I've seen us lean a lot more towards that Wall-E scenario where, like, people are
Oh,
sitting in chairs, hovering around,
it's
drinking their Big
prophetic,
Macs.
right?
Yeah, right. And that's,
It's hard to watch now.
dude, straight up. Yeah. And that stuff, that stresses me out a little bit, because I'm like, man, I don't want that, but I'm kind of seeing that that's unfolding in front of us. And I
Hmm.
really think that that's why I lean into technology a little bit, because I think we are using it wrong. I think we've kind of gone down the wrong path, and we still have time to, like, jump off it before we totally intersect with that Wally future. But the thing is like, what I see in the world is a lot of fear-based stuff. And so
So much.
when I, right. And so when I say that, what I'm really picturing is like the kid that could have been something in, the world, who's sitting there in a gutter starving and, dehydrated. The reason that's happening is because there are people who are fearful of, not having enough. And so they accumulate wealth, and it becomes unevenly distributed. And there's those people who fear that, like, someone who's less than them is going to rise up. And so we have these kind of regimes of power that isolate power to a select few and try to take it away from, let's say, the common folk, and I think
Yeah.
that's the thing that discourages me about, like, a technological future, is that if we lean into a fear-based mentality, it's gonna lead towards those dystopian futures that we've all seen in the movies and read in the books.
Yeah.
But I think that, what I see is, like, in my heart, leaning into the love and the faith with Christ, is that I'm willing to see that better future. I'm willing to push for it. And I think that's really what more people, I hope more people start to see that and do that in the future, because that's going to be the good person that's going to be in, the right place at the right time when bad men start making decisions. And, that's
Yeah.
something I even thought about when I was joining the military. Was like, I'm about to put myself in some really precarious situations that I probably couldn't imagine. And it might be very stressful, and it might,
Hmm.
put a real bruise on my soul going forward. But I thought to myself, like, if not me, then who? If I'm not going to be the good person in that room, that, the 10th man theory, where, like,
Yeah.
if out of 10 people, 9 are agreeing, it's kind of your obligation to disagree. I put
Yep.
myself in the military with that mentality, that, like, all right, well, if I ever see, like, bad stuff going on, I'm going to be the one to kind of stand up against it. And I think that that's what I want to see more of in, like, the technology sectors and, like, the science sectors, is like, okay, well, if everyone agrees on, like, quantum physics and the multiverse, then where's the person that's, like, willing to kind of disagree and to, like, say, hey, while I get what we're saying here, and we do have the, like, logic and reason, should we,
Yeah.
should we
Not,
be
not just
building?
because you can doesn't mean you should.
Dude, yeah, and I feel that way with some of these things that are going on in the world with science, like the Hadron Colliders, and
Hmm.
like Geneva, Switzerland, they have CERN, which is the like the Large Hadron Collider that smashes particles together, and they say that they're kind of creating, like, black holes and recreating the
Yeah.
instances of the Big Bang. And it's like, oh man, that sounds cool. The nerd in me is like, oh yes, but I also kind of wonder,
Yeah.
like, I wouldn't be the dude in the room who's like, yeah, let's create a black hole just because we can. I'd be the dude in the room that's like, guys, you know,
Yeah.
is this what we should be doing? And I think
Yeah.
that's what I see for space colonization. Is right now we got a lot of these, like, tycoons who are, like, ramped up, and they got, a lot of trajectory and velocity going for them and their ideals and their goals. But I don't necessarily see someone standing behind them with values, who's kind of helping be that, like,
Yeah.
that morality.
What's that? There's a phrase when you're like for communicators when you're like talking to people, and it's like, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it helpful? Right?
Yeah.
Like when it's like, honesty is the best policy, and I'm like, I don't know, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it helpful? And so, yeah, I'm right there with you. I look at a lot of these things, and I'm wondering, like, what what's the, in beginning with the end in mind, right? It's like, what's the end goal, right?
Mhm.
And what purposes do that serve? Because I still go back to like when I was a kid. I mean, I am older, but like when I was in high school, it was in the 90s, the early part of the 90s. And we were supposed to have jetpacks right now. Like 2025. Are you kidding me? Like I'm supposed to be in a flying car. I'm supposed to be able to, like, we were promised jetpacks. And
Yeah.
I'm still driving a gasoline fueled vehicle, like
Hmm.
we are decades behind where we're supposed to be. And
Totally.
so I think just age and experience, I look at it and I go, well, you know, how much of this is relevant to putting food on the table or some of those things? And, you talk about like resource allocation and that sort of thing. And I'm like, gosh, there's so much money that gets put into these things that I'm not sure how helpful it is. I'm not sure what, and I say that on a computer that's smaller than I mean, my first computer was the size of this desk, and
Right.
I mean, right now, like, if it fits under my pillow, and I'm using an iPhone as a camera, and I've got microphones and wires and all these things, and like you and I are in two different parts of the world, talking to each other in real time. Like, it's amazing. And
Hmm.
I'm constantly fighting with my 6-year-old to get off the iPad because, and if I take it from her, she bursts into tears and her whole world is falling apart. And I'm like, okay, we've developed a problem that we need to resolve. And so that's something that we have to work through, right?
Yep.
Because for her to compete in the world when she's 10 and 12, she's got to know how all that stuff works and be able to utilize those tools because they've just become the tool that, like, I was thinking about this the other day. One of my kids asked me something about money, and I was like, and I just kind of laughed because I don't deal in cash. Like, I don't, I don't have any exchange of monetary, you know, dollars like we used to when we were younger. Everything's direct deposit, everything's digital. I pay for everything online or with a piece of plastic. And she
Yeah.
was asking me about money, and I was just like, look, there's going to come a time where we're not even going to print money anymore. It's just going to be, I'm going to hold my watch or my phone or my wrist to a thing, and it's going to take, and I think, what was that movie Justin Timberlake did, the time, where time, it was just, you
In
pay for
time.
everything in time.
Yo.
Brilliant concept, loved that
Yeah.
whole vibe of like, but like that's, we're headed that way, and like there's some really cool things about it. Like, I don't have to cut down trees to print money. That's good. But then also, you look at Canada and they decided to shut
Right.
down everybody's bank accounts. And it's like, oh, you have no money. Oh, oh, right? Like, it gets super
Dude.
crazy when we start thinking
Yeah.
about what technology can lead us to.
Yeah. It's a slippery slope.
Oh, it's nuts. It's nuts. And I
Hmm.
don't think that the people, and I go back, so like we homeschool our kids. Um, and we've done that for about 14 years
Nice.
now. And we started that primarily because we were having some struggles in the public school system. And so my oldest two kids are 24 and 22. So we've been parenting for a long time. And my wife, it was my wife's idea. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. Like, we don't have time. We don't have the resources. I'm an idiot. Like, we're not going to do that. And then I met with a homeschool organization, at her request. And, I love her. So when she says, hey, I really want to do this, I go, yeah, okay, let's look into it. But we met with this homeschool organization, and she asked me, she said, do you know why we send our kids to public school? And I said, well, no, like, it was just always done that. And she said, yeah, but your great grandparents didn't go to public school. And I was like, no. And she's like, do the math. Like, think about it. Like, ask them. And I was like, well, they're not around to ask. So she gave me this book called Dumbing Us Down by this guy named John Taylor Gatto. And in it, he breaks down how public school became the norm. And it was in the late 1800s, early 1900s with Horace Mann, who came back from Prussia and implemented with the captains of industry, the Carnegies and the Mellons and the guys that ran U.S. Steel and all of those, the Rockefellers. And there's a letter from Carnegie that says basically, we have too many producers and not enough consumers. And as long as, and this is the American dream, right? Like to build your own business, to be a producer, to create. That's what humans, I think, are designed for, is to create. And he says in this letter, in order for us to maintain our place of power and our place of affluence, we will need to create a middle class. And in order to do that, this Prussian system of schooling will allow that, and it will create that. And so I started looking where we were then, and when they started public school, compulsory schooling, and you had to send your kids to school, there were riots. There were families and parents that were like, no, I'm not giving the state the power to control my kid. And they were labeled conspiracy theorists, and they were labeled all these things, and it got implemented. And then we had the Industrial Revolution, and we had factories, and we had people who went to work, and they stopped creating, and they just consumed. And I look at that in the early 1900s to where we are today, and it's not even 10x, it's 100x what those guys expected. But when you look at the families that are still in charge, not in charge to be conspiratorial, but the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, those
Right.
families are still where they're at. And it's like, holy shit, we absolutely submitted to this thing, and we're still doing it. Now it's just through social media, it's through entertainment, it's all these things, right? And I think that's why like Marvel and Star Wars have had this huge resurgence, because it's fascinating and it's interesting, but it's a way for us to glorify what's really, really dangerous in all of that technology.
Yeah, I would agree. And I kudos to you for putting your kids through homeschooling. I think everyone should be doing that at this point, because
Me too.
what I'm kind of unpacking, right? What I'm unpacking as you're explaining is because I've only heard like the cliff notes of that, so you went into a little more finer detail, and I appreciate that. But I almost hear like they created like an educated like surfing class with the middle class. It's like
100%.
yeah, it's like
It was
okay, so
intentional.
yeah, they wanted to give us a little bit of their plate so that we feel better about ourselves, and that we're kind of more complacent with the system that they've implemented around us, so to speak. And that stuff stresses me out because, like you said, today it's like hundreds of times worse than it was when they initiated it. And that stuff, I get into conspiracy theories really quickly with this stuff because, like you mentioned, the families that are still at the top, like I don't want to go into the future with those families staying at the top. I don't want to I don't want to be an 80 or 90-year-old man seeing these giant space colonies lifted up into the sky and finding out that like the Rockefellers are behind it, because I'm not going to trust that. I'm not going to trust that these dudes,
Yeah.
made the right decisions and have everyone's best interests in mind. There's this show, of course, it's funded by Jeff Bezos, called The Expanse, where they show those exact same space colonies I just showed you, except like the the conditions in them are so terrible that the corporations are doing things like cutting off air to colonists who are rebelling and stuff. And you mentioned that they were protesting and rioting when they tried to implement this public education system. Going to happen when we go to space, and these people are still doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I think something I always tell my friends is like, I think that if Bezos and Musk are the ones that like paved the roads for us to go to space, that there's going to be like a whole another second American revolution with these space colonists, that they're going to go through those conditions that Bezos
Yeah.
showed us in his TV show, where they're cutting off air and, kids are growing up, with brain damage because they didn't have enough oxygen. And people are going to be like, I don't like this. I don't accept this. And it's going to turn into like the Boston Tea
Yeah.
Party with space, and it's going to
Yeah.
escalate. And I
Well,
feel like,
I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said the tree of liberty should be watered with the blood of patriots, or something
Mm-hmm.
to that effect, right? Where it's like there's these cycles, and we were coming to a point where, for decades and decades and decades, we've not had that sort of rebellion. We've not had that sort of, liberty minded populace, if you will. And I honestly feel like it's conditioning. And you talk about, the school system, you know, talking about that, he breaks down, and the guy that wrote this book, he did a series of books, and then he had a YouTube channel for years until he passed away. He
Mm-hmm.
talks about, being a New York State teacher of the year. So this isn't a guy that was just like anti-school, like he was in the system. And he
Yeah.
wrote in this first book that he wrote, he writes about, here are the things I do as a teacher. I purposefully break down your child's spirit. I purposefully put them in a box. And he talks about how like the C students hang out with the C students. And if you're a C student, you're a C student your whole life. And if you're this, that, or the other thing by a certain age, you just fulfill this archetype that you have been defined as, that you've been conditioned to believe that you are. And so when you talked earlier about like people being in fear, it's like we no longer are encouraged to be who we are, to follow our dreams. And then that's coming back in a way, but I think it's like so polarized at this point. You have guys like Gary Vee who are like, don't go to college, just figure it out, you'll be okay. And if you don't, then yeah, get a job, whatever. But like, it's not this traditional thing that we've been building up for the last 100 years. And what's interesting to me is that the guys that you're mentioning aren't part of those families, right? Like the Bezos and the Musk. These are guys who took advantage of the early .com scenarios and built things and then made a ton of money. And so they're operating on a kind of a different plane. But you still have people like, like Bill Gates, for example, who isn't a eugenist. Like he's into, you know these really crazy concepts from, way back when. and
Mm-hmm.
and those are things that are hard to kind of ignore. And so for me, like, I tend to get into that weird space of like, I'm gonna shrink it down into the smallest, most local. What can I do? I can raise my kids to be good people, to love each other, to not be divisive, to be affirming, to ride the wave, so to speak, and,
Right.
and just love on people, because at the end of the day, like, our time here is short. And so what I'm more concerned with in raising them is watching these things and removing myself from as many of the systems as we can. Like, my wife and I work from home. We don't have jobs. So when the global pandemic hits, I don't have to worry about, do I have a job? Do I not have a job? Do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? Do I have to get a vaccine? Do I not get a vaccine? What are these systems that are used to like induce that fear and induce that control? As much as I can remove myself from those, the better. Which unfortunately for me means when they create the space colony and I have to have all the shots and I have to follow all the rules and I have to do all the things, I'm just gonna die here lonely because I'm not doing it. So maybe that's why I don't think about it or care about it, because I'm like, I'm not participating in that.
Right. I'm not going to eat the bugs.
I'm going to die alone here with my kids.
And see, that's where I'm so glad you took it here, because I feel like we've had our potential hijacked as the human race. And I think that, like, I'm going to say it's at a biblical level, because I think like there are malevolent forces that are at work that are guiding some of these people. And, the thing that really stresses me out is, like you said, like, I'm not going to take these shots. Like, in my mind, man, these space colonies have the potential to like liberate people from tyranny and to allow for, like, let's say, like a more libertarian anarcho kind of like civilization where people are able to, like, I don't know, grow and develop as they naturally would without like outside malicious forces guiding them, and I think that right now what I'm seeing in the world is like they've ramped up those malicious forces they're trying to guide people like hundredfold. It's like
Yeah.
throw a rock and I hit like 10 different agendas, and
Yeah.
it's like I'll pick one. They're all pretty much leading to the same path. And that's what stresses me out about this potential future that we have is like I had a vision of a very liberated humanity in the near future, and then the pandemic hit. And I
Hmm.
personally felt like, you know, going into some of the quantum physics stuff, like my concern was, did they hijack like our timeline? All those like 1,000 different paths I was talking about earlier. This seems like the one out of 1,000 paths that we're walking on now. And it's being dictated by what I would say are malicious forces behind the
Hmm.
scenes. And that makes me not trust the current reality, so to
Yes.
speak. That makes me think like, oh, what they're doing now is they're trying to enact like their end game, their goals. They're not letting humanity go down its natural path of progression. They're instead turning us and pushing us and guiding us down this really bad path. And I think to get a lot more biblical, I think that like these people that are kind of guiding the world down this really poor path have kind of like kickstarted a lot more faith in people. Something I've noticed talking to a lot of people is like in the past 40
Mm.
years, a lot of people I've talked to have found their faith again. They've had like
Yeah.
really, really wild experiences that just made them be like, God's real, follow Christ. And it's like
Yeah.
it pumps me up because I think that's the antithesis of what they want to happen with the world. They thought they would have this on lockdown and everyone would be, that negative version of the sheep that we talked about that Americans don't want to be.
Hmm.
They thought they could push us down that. And I
Yeah.
think the human spirit is like persevering and growing more, adept, I would even say, and just kind of fighting back. And like, I think that what I'm seeing is more Christ-like behavior in the world nowadays than almost ever from like your ordinary people. But the people who are at top, I'm seeing more demonic Luciferian agendas coming out of them. And I
Yeah.
think that's that balance that you were talking about earlier, where like
It has
almost
to
in a
be
Star
there.
Wars, yeah. Yep. It's like the light and the dark. Like the dark has risen so much, but the light is
Hmm.
also coming to meet it. And that's what I'm
Yeah.
seeing in the world.
Yeah. I would agree. And I think, I mean, the dark, that dark side, right? It's concentrated, as I think it always has been. And, it's funny because we have this thing socially where it's like money, 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 billionaires, billionaires, billionaires. And I don't really subscribe to the idea that like a billionaire has to pay more in taxes or less in tax. Like, I'm a fan of like a flat tax. Like everybody pays
Mm-hmm.
5%, 10%, whatever. I don't care. You make a million, you pay X, you make like this whole graduated, like, well, if you're a billionaire, you should make more. Like, I don't, and the idea is that like the reason they want to do that is because we feel like billionaires are bad people, right? And that might be partially true, but I don't think money is what makes you bad. You're just bad. Like money just amplifies who you already are. Because I have friends who are multimillionaires, but you would never know it because they give most of it away. And they do tremendously awesome things and build schools and hospitals. And I mean, legitimately like crazy stuff, but you don't hear about them because the media doesn't want to talk about them because that's not sexy, and they
Right.
don't talk about it, right? Like we're talking about sobriety. I've recently, probably in the last year, have been reminded that my sobriety is a big deal and that people should hear about me being sober and that they should hear about my journey. And I never thought about it. I mean, I've been sober for 18 years, and when I got sober, I just new lifestyle, didn't really think about it. And we didn't have Facebook when I got sober, so I didn't really get to, I didn't have an opportunity to talk about it. And by the time there was a way to talk about it in a big way, I had just moved on. But in sort of exploring how I can use my sobriety to help others, because I think all of our stories have a purpose to move other people forward. I've realized like the number of celebrities or wealthy and popular and influential people who are sober is staggering, but you don't hear about it because it isn't sexy and it doesn't sell. You hear about Britney Spears and, the people who are train wrecks, and Robert Downey Jr. was in the news all the time for his antics. But now that he's clean, they don't ever talk about that because it doesn't matter, right? And so like the dark stuff is very concentrated, and we know a lot about that. But I like what you said. There are a lot more people that are coming forward with light, and they're coming forward with ways to move people forward. And it's really interesting. I think a lot of those people came to that realization, I think, through some sort of tragedy or through some sort of trauma. And then I think there's a lot of people like my own family who came to a return to faith sort of what felt like organically. And I've had some conversations around this, but what I really think is that was sort of divinely guided to create a space where we, like my family specifically, and I think there's others like us, who were comforted and guarded and held safe through the last couple of years, so that there would be more positive voices, there would be more.
Totally.
You know what I'm saying? Like I didn't come back to the church because my marriage was failing or because I was drunk or because my kids weren't talking to me anymore. Like my life was essentially pretty good. That's why I talk about like, where do you think those people get their moral compass? I think honestly, it is God. It is divine, because the truth is truth. You don't have to accept it. It's still there. And we got brought kind of into the church and into this place of real sort of being part of that light before we had tragedy.
Yeah.
And I do believe that was God kind of pushing us into that space, going, I'm going to need people to help spread my word and help share. And so you don't need to go through tragedy to get there. Like, I don't know. I don't fully understand it. And that's the other big piece for me is like, I really want to understand. I really want to unpack it. I really want to dive into it and know the nuances of it.
Mm-hmm.
But part of my faith journey has been getting to a place where I can go, it's beyond my understanding, and just leaving it at that.
Totally.
Because I got to make sure my kids get fed at the next meal, and I got to make sure their hearts are protected, and that I can do. All this other stuff,
Right.
I'm not so sure about, right? And I wonder if that's the quantum physics piece is like, I'm going to choose my reality, because there's all this other noise, there's all this other distraction, there's all these other, you know, uh, universes opening up or portals opening up that I could choose to go down. But for me, it's those tiny humans that I still have to raise.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I get to choose that path rather than, I think earlier you said something like, it's kind of not chosen for you, but like there's a little bit of like this path, as long as I stay connected to God, I'm on this path.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that, but I also feel like God gave us free will. He gave us the will to choose him or not. And so it isn't just what he's decided for. You know what I'm saying? Like
Totally.
there's a tension point there of what he wants for us versus what we get to choose for ourselves. And I like to think that I'm choosing my reality in focusing on those things and not everything else that's happening, right? I'll see it and I'll go, oh, that's really weird. That's definitely not normal. But I'm gonna just let it
Totally.
be over there because I got to take care of these other people.
Well, I think for me, what I find the beauty in it is like, when I speak on like, there's this path that, once you become a follower of Christ, what I see that is like, that's the path to salvation. And it only ends with my soul in one place. And that's kind of where I see like the multiverse kind of closing when you find salvation, is that, there's, sure, I have the infinite possibilities in front of me, but if I only choose, Christ in my life, then that kind of like closes out some of those other ones. That closes out the potential for me to be, well, it doesn't close it out, but I'm still there to be like fallen. I can still fall from grace and stuff. But if I continue my path of following Christ, like it leads me to heaven and it leads my soul's salvation. And that's kind of where I come from with that. But I think like the thing that I see with a lot of people going on nowadays is in general, it I just see so many people who kind of self-empower, and that kind of I think takes away from that, because there's this idea that it goes back to the morality thing. If I am the ultimate chooser of my own morality, then morality is not objective, it's not factual based, it's subjective, it's per
Mhm.
subject. What I say
Yeah.
goes. And so I think that's where that potential for salvation kind of like broadens out, and it's like, okay, well, if I'm the one who chooses the ultimate morality, because there is no ultimate morality, it's all basically just whatever we make of it, then that leaves like so many other things open. And I think that's kind of like the path to the dark side in a sense. That's where it's like Anakin, so to speak, in Star
Yeah.
Wars, like, well, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. And it's like that, gives me shivers thinking about it. But like, I think that's what happens when you have subjective reality, is that like you lose track of that truth, and then you kind of start finding your own truths or half truths, and those don't have that foundation in reality. So what happens is you kind of just get lost in the sauce of the multiverse, I would say, in a sense.
Yeah.
You get lost in all that potential that like you could easily flip the script and be like, oh, well, you know what, like I don't I see Christ as the enemy now. He's the tyrant, he's the one who's trying to control our lives. And it's funny because you and me are sitting here and you're saying, I don't see Christ as like that thing that closes off potential. There's freedom in that. And that's what I started leading with earlier in this conversation, was like, I find that by following Christ, I actually open up more potential and freedom in my life. But when I speak of that, I speak of that in like the sense of the good that I can do in my life. It's not like,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
now,
It's
now that I
interesting
follow,
as you're walking me through this, I'm kind of recognizing how, like, in following Christ, it does create the path, right? Because if you follow Christ and you do as he commanded, which is to love one another, then, and he tells us what love is. It's patient, it's kind, right? I have to carry my brother's burden. I have to walk alongside. So it does sort of make those choices for you, right? When we go, well, what would this look like? And that's the tension there, right? Like, and I don't know how much you listen to Andy Stanley, but he's one of my favorites, and I refer back to him often. Um, but he says he has a whole message around tension points, right? And he presents it along the tension of truth and grace, right? Like there's truth, and then there's grace, and we can't resolve the two because there's always going to be truth. It's true that I fail as a human. It's true that I fail and that I falter and that I'm selfish and that I'm unkind and that I'm angry and that I do have those thoughts. The grace is that I get to be forgiven for those things. I get to put those behind me and I get to move on. Same with like feelings, right? Like we were talking earlier about feelings, and one of my favorite quotes or sayings is that feelings aren't facts. Like you can feel that way, but that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it true. But
straight up.
it's still valid. I can still be mad or angry or depressed or sad. And I can feel that, but I have to figure out a way to work through it because typically what I'm feeling isn't true. Right. And
Mhm.
what Andy kind of talks about, the point I'm trying to make, I guess, is that he says we should never be able to resolve for truth and grace. There should always be tension there because once we resolve for it, we're either all truth, and that's lacking compassion, and that's very, like I think about the woman at the well, right? Like, yes, you're on your fifth husband, or you're with your sixth partner and he's not your husband, and that's sinful, and that's not ideal, right? And it's all these things, but the grace in that is we can resolve that and we can move forward. And you don't want to be all grace because then we don't have accountability, right? Then we have to be able to say, well, no, you did hurt that person. So you need to. So I like the way he presented it. And it's like, there's got to be tension. And for me, it just kind of affirmed my idea that like, there's going to be balance in the force. There's always got to be good and evil.
Yep.
Because if we resolve for one, then what, if there's no evil, then what's our motivation to do better? If there's no darkness, then what's our motivation to keep moving forward? And so like, I think the Bezos and the Musks of the world can be those archetypes that for us give us the motivation to go, well, at least I know what I don't want. I know how I don't want to
Mhm.
behave. I want to
Totally.
move this way, right?
Yep.
So
Man,
yeah, super fascinating.
yeah, I really resonate with that because we're just like a Jordan Peterson fan club in here. We're just quoting him. He he said, um, as a young man, like you shouldn't want to be like a pushover and you shouldn't want to be like the nicest guy ever. He was saying like you should be a monster. You should be a
Yeah,
monster that's in control of being a
yeah, the
monster though.
dangerous
And
man. It's a
yeah,
good.
and that harkens back to his kind of explanation of like what meek in the Bible means. I believe he said something along the lines of like the real definition of meek would be that someone who has a sword and knows how to use it but doesn't. And I think that
Yeah,
that's sort of that balance that kind of manifests itself in like the heart of man. Like the world has made me a rough and tumble man, but I choose not to allow that to dictate my actions. I choose to be better, and that's that grace. And with the people that I interact with, it's like I might come across one dude who, I politely yet firmly asked to leave. And then 5 minutes later, coming across another group of people that I invited to my camp and we're cooking steaks together and getting to know each other. And that's that, I think, that grace in a sense, because you kind of can't be both, like you're saying, at all times. There's
yeah,
always going to be that confliction, I think, in man. And I think that what makes not all good men, but what makes a lot of good men is hardships and those trials and tribulations
mhm,
and what the heart of that individual does with that experience, so
yeah,
like for me, and I'm sure you can relate because some of the things we've talked about like are so similar between us, from our alcoholism to our faith and all that. I find that like there's absolutely a parallel universe version of me, if that's a real thing, where I'm like the darkest dude ever. I'm
yeah,
just, my heart is full of hatred and anger and pain, and I've given into that. And that's, in that sort of world, assuming that that stuff's real, that's what gives me encouragement in this life, is to know that I'm not that monster that's
yeah,
unchained. I am a very tethered monster, and I'm very in control of that dark side of myself. And, I honestly am like thankful for all the hardships that I've had, because, I it put me where I am today. I was talking to one of my friends a couple years ago, and I'm getting real deep into like loss and everything. And I had this kind of
yeah.
revelation that like, my mom passed when I was really young. And I
Really?
thought to myself, yeah, I was 12 years old when my mom passed away. And it was
Mm,
like the hardest thing I've ever had to do was deal with that. And, I I am grateful that that happened, as like coarse as that sounds, because it made me the man I am today. And
you
if
have to be.
yeah, if things had gone differently and I grew up my whole life with my mother, I'd be a totally different person.
Yeah,
And, for all intents and purposes, that person doesn't matter to me today. The person that matters to me today is who I am today.
yeah,
And so everything that unfolded as it need be led to me here I am today, talking to another brother in Christ about Christ and, deep philosophies and the state
yeah,
of the world. And I'm so thankful to be where I am today, because every day I wake up and it's beautiful. And I owe that. I put those beautiful days on Christ, because I do see that I have been redeemed, that I'm not that dark version of me. I'm not the
yeah,
Sith, the fallen version of Ty. I'm, every day working to become a better version of myself. And I keep in mind that like there is that potential to kind of like fall into that monster that's not, being controlled. And I keep that in mind as like that's part of my grace, is like
yeah,
being able to reel in the darkness and being able to um, kind of, I'd say, distill out of that darkness something that's beautiful and great.
yeah. No, I love that, and I think you're spot on, man. We have to, and you have to be grateful because and I know there's a lot of people that are suffering and they're in the midst of that storm, and they're having a hard time to find the gratitude in that or to see the light in
Oh
it.
yeah.
And at the same time though, like your experience, my experience, those of us that have come through those things, we can look back on them and go, man, it's like that prayer. I asked God for strength, and so he gave me struggles,
Oh yeah.
right? Like you don't just wake up one day stronger. You have to build that, and that's emotional, that's physical, that's mental, it's all of those things. And so yeah, you almost have to have gratitude. It's funny, the parallels that you and I have experienced, because I lost my mom when I was 3, so I was much younger, and
Oh
it didn't in a tangible way impact me emotionally because I was too young to really understand it. um so had I been
mm,
12, it would have certainly been a much more difficult thing to experience. And at the same time, like the ripple of that experience created a lot of hardships when I was younger. And my dad, my stepmom has been gone for 8 or 9 years now, but my dad is still alive, and he often has apologized for what the outcomes or what things happen. And I said, Dad, and I finally had to tell him, like, you need to stop apologizing, because what happened in those experiences have led me to the point that I am today. And it's because of those experiences that I had to, or because of the demons that came out of those experiences, that I had to learn how to overcome them. And that's given me an experience that I get to share with others. Like, I'm able to help others. I got a text message yesterday from a friend of mine who said, "Hey, I just want to thank you for sharing this, resource with me, because it helped me reconcile some of my faith and bring me closer to Jesus." And he's a youth leader, and he shared that resource with a kid that he's leading, who shared with him that it helped him get closer to God. Because, and I was just like, and it's so my journey, as simple and as inconsequential as it may seem, has helped bring others closer to God. And if that's all I ever do, that's a good thing, right? And that's the thing. And I think that's why you and I connect, and why I consider you such a resource and such a great companion, is that, like, we can have those struggles and have those things and look at those things and go, well, yeah, and it's good. And what am I to learn from this, right? Nelson Mandela said,
right.
I never lose. I either win or I learn. And that just hit me like, okay, that's
Ooh,
it. That's my mantra. Whatever's
yeah.
happening, it's not a loss, it's a lesson.
Man,
We're
and
good.
to bring it all back full circle, dude, weren't we just talking about that's what's going on with the world,
That's it.
That darkness has been rising and light to meet it, and like I feel like that it's so amazing to see that happen in the micro and the macro, because like
Yeah.
in the heart of man, I'm seeing it all the time. And then in the world at large, I'm seeing it, across hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and it's like I think that's what really makes me pumped up about being alive in today's world, is like as cruel and harsh as it is, it's been crueler and harsher, but like
Mm-hmm.
people are still dealing with some wild things. I mean, you could censor this out if you want, but like, in my personal opinion, like we've been dosed with bioweapons and our own government's kind of like throwing those at us. And it's like, man, that's a dark timeline. Like that is not what I ever expected to happen when I
Yeah.
was a kid. The last thing I would have told you I'd think would happen would be like, well, the government's going to create bioweapons and they're going to, go
And
across the world. And it's like,
you know what crazy is, though, if you're a student of history, they did it in Tuskegee, they did it in Vietnam. It's not the first time. It's
yeah.
probably the most, in my opinion, blatant and
Hmm.
large scale, but it's not the first time. and,
Right.
and so
Exactly.
so and what's crazy to me is to I've always trusted that in this country with these systems, it would play out for the best. It's always been you've got the bicamerate or bicameral, whatever that word is, Congress. You've got checks and balances between the legislative, the judicial, and the executive branches. And so for years, since like 2014, 2015, when I feel like things started getting really sideways, I've said the system works. The system works. There's all sorts of injustices, but the system works. And in the last 2 years, I've watched it not work, and gone, the system's broken. And that's that darkness we've been talking about, right? But to your point, I've seen so many people wake up to it. And I've seen a lot of people wake up to it in really polarizing, unhelpful ways. But I've also seen people wake up to it and go, okay, so this is something I need to pay attention to, and it's been fascinating to watch. But yeah, it's a full circle thing for sure, man.
It's almost like, it reminds me, you talk about people waking up to it. I hearken back to like the Matrix, like how Keanu came out of that pod and was just like, robots and towers and people are batteries. It's like people handle that different ways, and not to say that we're like at that point yet, but I think like you're saying, it's like me, for instance, like I always had a really, I would say, healthy skepticism of the system. And same as you, I kind of like was like, well, like it'll get us through. I don't think it's like to the point of like total hopelessness. And recently I've kind of been like, oh, it's not going to get us through. That script has been
100%.
flipped. My faith in the system now is totally lacking. Now it's stronger in Christ. But I think like I totally see what you're saying, because some of my friends wake up to this reality and they're like, freaking out, yelling, screaming. And it's like they rage against the machine now.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's some of us that kind of come out of it. And I think this would be me, where I came out of it with a little bit like more of a like apprehensive humility, where I was like, oh, this is what's happening. This is what we're facing now. This is it, and I think for me, the best example that I could give you is like why I started coming to church. So I'm really pumped to share this with you. Last year, there was that Travis Scott concert in Texas where people were dying and stuff.
Yeah.
And I did not like anything I saw about that. I saw a bunch of like occult symbolism. I saw like portal imagery. Travis Scott had like a t-shirt on that had like a blue person, like a stick figure, walking through a portal and coming out red. And like the whole concert had this like very hellish landscape scenery where like flames are shooting up and there's like bodies of flames dancing around in the background. Yeah, super unnerving stuff. And I followed the kind of media that was unraveling about that concert for about 2 weeks until I just stopped, because I found one video this girl had found, and I watched it, and she's saying that what she's seeing in this video at the Travis Scott concert, and I could see with my own two eyes, was she said that it looked like there was an angel of death hovering over the concert. And she's got this video where it's showing the stage and it zooms out and it zooms into the sky, and there's this like T-shaped, looks like someone's standing like this, floating in the air over the concert. And I've done a lot of like venue stuff. I've worked at like festivals. I've been like an audio guy. I've seen like the camera systems that they have the pulleys on and stuff.
Yeah.
And none of this like seems to fit the bill for that. And when I saw that, it just it stuck to me that like, oh, we're entering now a world where there's like possibly demons flying over concerts where people are dying, and there's like hellish imagery and occult stuff going on. Like to me, it looked like a ritual sacrifice of concert goers. And I was like, if that's what's going on in the world, if then so, everything else about, religion and Christianity I've learned about and been taught about is true. And that concert is what pushed me to the point where I'm like, if this is the way the world is, then I need to go, I'm capable of like facing reality head on, if that's what the reality we're at is. And that's just kind of like where I find myself in the world today, is like things have gotten so far away from what I thought was possible that now I need to be like willing to accept like things that may have seemed impossible before,
Yeah.
and that's kind of why I am where I am today to talk to you like this, is that I've just found myself in a whole new different mindset of like it, I'd say the things like spiritual warfare, I've acknowledged a lot more, and I feel like I have like I'm more adept to understanding and seeing that that stuff's going on. And that's really what it feels like, is like they've ramped up the spiritual warfare on people. And it seems like the war for people's souls is hitting the streets now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I tend to steer clear of a lot of that stuff because I think I'm just naive to like, or I don't know, because I hear what you're saying, and I don't discount it as a possibility. That's one of the things that I look at that kind of stuff and I go, man, that's crazy, or that's
Right.
seemingly impossible. And then, because that's like my gut reaction, right? Is like, well, that's like biblical, that's fantastical, right? Um, but then I think back on my own life, and I think back on things that I've actually seen or things that I've participated in, and go, well, it's not that far. It's 1-2 steps removed from what I've actually seen.
Right.
And so, but for me, I think it gets overwhelming, and I think I get into a place where I think it, and I kind of just fall back on it being naivete of like, is that really possible? Is that really what's happening? And I'm definitely the cynic and the skeptic, right? And like, I just assume that if it's on video, it's doctored. I assume that if like, which is, you know, totally resonated with me when I listened to PD talk about the reason we don't see miracles now is because nobody would believe them anyway. There's just too
Yeah.
many,
No.
and I was like 100%. Like everything I see on video, I'm like, that ain't real. But but that's not a healthy place to be necessarily. And for me, like those types of things just resolve me to like also go, man, we could all just poof out of here tomorrow. And so I'm just going to be the best person I can be and take care of the most people I can take care of. And why I have all those feelings and all those things and all those other things we talked about, like the one thing I can maintain is kindness. And so if I can just keep holding on to that, right, and trying to love people, then if it all poofs away tomorrow, which I used to think ain't gonna happen. Now I'm kind of like, well, maybe that's probably more possible than I thought.
Right. That the last few, maybe decade, has kind of brought me to that point where like the
Yeah.
things that I thought were unlikely are kind of coming out in the world. And I'm like, well, I used to grow up like the one thing as a young Christian that always kind of bugged me is like reading the Bible. I was like, this doesn't seem like the same world. This seems like some of these
Yeah.
things, it's almost like so far detached that it'd be like Middle Earth from Lord of the Rings or something. Like I'm reading about a
Right.
different realm where
Right.
different possibilities or potential exist. And now as I've gotten older, I actually find that like I'm like, no, I don't think the biblical things were that far off from this world anymore. I'm starting to see
They
more
just
now
look
as I've
different.
grown. Yeah, straight up. Different names, different names, and it
Yeah.
looks different. But I am seeing now that like a lot of my, skepticism, we're bringing back what PD was talking about last Sunday.
Yep.
A lot of my skepticism I had is as a youth has kind of like faded away because of the things that have been presented to me in the world
Mm-hmm.
seemed like so out of the norm and so like impossible that, when I'm sitting there watching it, like you said, anything on a screen you should be skeptical of, I think. Like
Yep.
I'm with you on that. That's why I don't partake in the news. But like when I do partake in the news and I see these things, I'm like, either they're trying to like throw an illusion over our head and make us think the world is a certain way that it's not, or the world is a certain way that I didn't think it was. And either
Yeah.
way, there's like a disconnect there that I kind of feel a little more inclination to close the gap. And I've found that as I've grown in my faith, like that skeptical gap is really fallen to the wayside, because I think what I'm seeing now in the world is just telling me that, hey, a lot of that stuff you thought would never happen's happening. So
Yep.
like you said, if it comes to like us all going up tomorrow, and it's just tomorrow's the rapture or something, it's like, well, I've heard that before was coming, so why would I have doubted it in the first place is kind of
Yeah.
where.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%, man. Well, listen, I know we're probably out of time. Um, we could talk all day
Yeah,
about all these things, man.
mhm.
This has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate it. And just thank you for being so raw and vulnerable and talking about, you know, all the good stuff and all the weird stuff. And I never know where these conversations are going to go
Oh
because
yeah.
I prefer to leave them unscripted and let them be divinely guided to wherever somebody somewhere needs to hear this or hear something from this, and they will. And so thanks for taking the time to open up your heart and just get into the good stuff, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, bro, I really appreciate you for having me on, dude. I was super looking forward to this conversation. It's been a real honor and privilege. So, again, thank you, brother.